Witnesses of crime. In the volume of evidence collected by Sokolov and General Dietrichs are contained the depositions of 3 eyewitnesses of the crime. One of these eyewitnesses was Paul Medvedev, another was converted Sergeant Anatol Yakimov, and a third was Red Guard named Proskurikov, who helped to remove the traces. Medvedev told his wife all that had occurred immediately after the murder. He boasted that he was the only Russian workman who had taken part in the shooting, and that all the others, apart from Yurovsky and his assistants, were, quote, not ours, end quote. In other words, were foreigners. Medvedev was caught later at Perm while trying to blow up the bridge over the Kama behind the retreating Red Army. When arrested and questioned, he confirmed all the details given by him to his wife, but insisted that he had not taken part in the shooting and concocted an alibi. Yurovsky, he said, just before the murder was committed, had sent him out to see if anyone was around and whether the shots could be heard. On his way out, he heard the shots and immediately returned. I saw that all the members of the Tsar's family, the Tsar, the Tsarina, the 4 daughters, and the Naslедnik were already lying on the floor with numerous wounds on their bodies, and the blood was flowing in torrents. The doctor, maid, and two menservants had also been killed. When I appeared, the Naslednik was still alive, groaning. Yurovsky went up to him and fired 2 or 3 times point blank into him. The Naslednik was still. The picture of the murder and the smell inside of the blood made me feel sick. Yakimov, the second witness, was the guard whose conversion through the spectacle of the Tsar's sufferings and through observation of the Tsar's character has been described above. He retained his post as sergeant of the guard after the other members were transferred. There is no good reason to believe that he was present at the murder. His evidence was full and circumstantial and corroborated that of Medvedev in every detail. Like Medvedev, he offered an alibi, declaring that he had been told of what occurred by the 2 sentries outside the window and by the 2 others in the courtyard when the bodies were taken out. He declared that he heard of the murder only at 4 o'clock in the morning and that for the rest of the night he was unable to sleep, but, quote, just sat and shivered, end quote. At 8 o'clock in the morning, he went to his sister, the wife of an official of the Commissariat of Justice named Agafonov. His sister testified that he was very much upset, that his face was convulsed and his body trembling. When she questioned him, he admitted that he had seen the spectacle with his own eyes and that he had been so shaken that he had to go out several times to get the open air. After his departure, the sister ran at once to her husband and told him the story. She was weeping and overcome with horror. Her husband repeated the tale afterward to an investigating magistrate named Tomaszewski. Later in the day, Yakimov came to take leave of Agafonov. He was going to the front. His face was convulsed. That Agafonov was convinced that the story he had told his sister was true. When he asked him about it, Yakimov replied only, "Viskonchino," which means it is all over. Proskuryakov, whose type is that of the young, good-natured peasant, deposed that he had entered the guard from the curiosity to see the Tsar. He had spent the evening drinking, quote, denaturet, which means methylated spirits, with friends and had been placed under arrest by Medvedev. The latter came to the bathhouse where he was sleeping off the effects of the liquor and ordered him to help wash the bloodstains from the floor and walls. The bodies had already been removed. The details of the murder were told him by one of the guards named Strikotin, who told the same story without change to a brother guard, Lediman. Lediman was arrested later and found to be in possession of a number of valuables belonging to the family. Proskurikov also deposed that Medvedev told the story to him and to the other guards who were washing the floor. Medvedev, he declared, had admitted that he had taken part in the shooting and had not said a word about having been sent outside. Disposition of the bodies. We now reach the last episode in the tragic tale, which concerns the destruction of the bodies. The evidence makes gruesome reading. In reconstructed form, the account is as follows. The murder accomplished. All the bodies were carried into the courtyard and placed on the waiting motor lorry. They were rolled up in old coats and covered with mats to deceive all curious eyes. Yurovsky, Ermakov, Vaganov went with the ghastly load, leaving Medvedev to supervise the efforts to remove all accusing traces. The lorry's first destination was the Vert Iseks ironworks, adjoining the city along the route to Koptyaki, northeast of Yekaterinburg. Just a few miles beyond lay the Stenbuk-Fermor woods, where the last gruesome task was accomplished. Ermakov lived at these ironworks where, before departing to the death house, he had left certain orders as military commissary. When the lorry arrived, Ermakov found, according to his instructions, a detachment of Red Guards waiting with a number of conveyances ready for departure. The lorry started out again with these new escorts and moved along the Koptyaki road. Vaganov had left the lorry and on horseback acted as an armed guard for the lorry. The procession, shortly after 3 o'clock in the morning, reached a point where several long disused and grass-grown paths converged to the left toward a ditch place called Ganina Yama, where a deep mining shaft was situated. This was chosen as the place for the destruction of the bodies, and a cordon of red soldiers was thrown around the whole wood. During that day and the 2 following days and nights, all passage through the wood was stopped. As a result of this barrier, a crowd of fisherfolk and vacationists striving to reach Koptyaki, a pretty place which attracted many summer residents, collected at the level crossing over the Ural line. The establishment of this cordon greatly aroused the curiosity of the peasants, who hastened to the spot immediately after the cordon was raised, and whose evidence afforded immense and valuable service to the later investigation. The further narrative may be reconstructed from the findings of the investigation as follows. Ghastly labors. Having reached the chosen spot, the regicides partly undressed the bodies. The bodices of the Grand Duchess Olga, Tatiana, and Anastasia attracted their attention by their weight. They tore them apart and spilled the costly jewels concealed thereupon the ground. Some of them were rolled into the grass and were trodden into the soil of the clay mound that surrounded the pit's mouth. Around the neck of the Grand Duchess Olga, they found a satchel containing special gems, and around her shoulders several ropes of pearls. They then set to work to hack the partly denuded bodies to pieces on the mound, in doing which they smote and cleft some of the valuables that still remained. Their next step was to soak the dismembered remains in sulfuric acid, large quantities of which had been brought from Yekaterinburg in order to dissolve the larger bones, after which they dipped them in oil and threw them into 2 piers which had been built and lighted, one near the shaft, the other near a birch tree. The clothes of the victims were also burned. All the cinders were then collected and thrown down the shaft of the mine, which had been previously prepared. The bottom of the shaft was so deep that ice remained in it throughout the summer. This ice was smashed with hand grenades in the cinders, and the last remains sank to the bottom beneath the water. A flooring was then adjusted over them and firmly fixed. The murderers, with the exception of Yurovsky, who motored back and forth from Yekaterinburg in the company with Golosheshkin on the 17th, 18th, and 19th, remained in the wood until their ghoulish work was done. Innumerable witnesses saw them coming and also saw them leaving, rolling about in the lorry like men wearied to death. Thus the unspeakably grisly crime was consummated. Meanwhile, the whole Ipatiev house was plundered and everything discarded thrown into the fireplaces, whose fires were kept blazing. The guards were continued throughout this whole period around the death house, so that the people suspected nothing. They were removed only on the 4th day, when the cordon around the wood was raised. We now come to the elaborate efforts allegedly made by the Soviet government to conceal the real facts in the case and to whitewash its own guilt. The author of the account, Heron Analyze, says, There has probably not been another instance in the whole history of crime of precautions to escape detection half so elaborate as in the Romanov murder case. All sorts of subterfuges have been tried by lesser criminals with more or less success. Here every ruse was combined. The murderers carried out the following comprehensive program. 1. They gave out a false announcement of the execution. 2. They destroyed the bodies. 3. They invented a mock funeral. And 4. They staged a mock trial. But the very complexity of the Soviet precautions proved their undoing. In vain they suborned false witnesses to give misleading information of the whereabouts of the bodies, announcing officially that the family had been removed to a, quote, safe place and NC. Sokolov has run them into the open. The false announcement. On July 20th, 1918, was the announcement made at the meetings and in official proclamations that Nicholas the Bloody had been executed. The wireless stations of the Bolshevist government flashed the news abroad. The official announcement was couched in the following terms. At the first session of the Central Executive Committee elected by the Fifth Congress of the Councils, a message was made public, received by direct wire from the Ural Regional Council, concerning the shooting of the ex-Tsar, Nicholas Romanov. Recently, Yekaterinburg, the capital of the Red Ural, was seriously threatened by the approach of the Czechoslovak bands. At the same time, a counter-revolutionary conspiracy was discovered, having for its object the wresting of the tyrant from the hands of the council's authority by armed force. In view of this fact, the Presidium of the Ural Regional Council decided to shoot the ex-Tsar, Nicholas Romanov. This decision was carried out on July 16th. The wife and son of Romanov have been sent to a place of security. Documents which concern the conspiracy, which were discovered, have been forwarded to Moscow by a special messenger. It had been recently decided to bring the ex-Tsar before a tribunal to be tried for his crimes against the people, and only later occurrences led to delay in the adopting this course. The presidency of the Central Executive Committee, after having discussed the circumstances which compelled the Ural Regional Council to take the decision to shoot Nicholas Romanov, decided as follows. The Russian Central Executive Committee, in the persons of the Presidium, accept the decision of the Ural Regional Council as being regular. The Central Executive Committee has now at its disposal extremely important material concerning the Nicholas Romanov affair, his own diaries, which he kept almost to the last days, the diaries of his wife and children, his correspondence, among which are letters by Gregory Rasputin to Romanov and his family. All these materials will be examined and published in the near future. On the basis of the official documents of investigation placed in the hands by Sokolov, the author of the Times articles declares that every statement contained in this official Soviet announcement is false, showing up in more glaring colors and diabolical nature of the plot conceived and carried out by Sverdlov and his accomplices. First of all, the alleged message was from the Ural Council was concocted by Sverdlov himself. The Czechs did enter Yekaterinburg, but not until July 25th, 9 days after the execution. There is no evidence of an armed plot to liberate the ex-Tsar. The Presidium of the Ural Council did not, quote, decide to shoot the Tsar for that. Quote, decision was dictated from Moscow by Sverdlov. The Tsarina and the Tsarevich were not sent to a place of security, but were foully murdered. There was no intention to bring the Tsar to trial before an official tribunal. The alleged, quote, later occurrences were fictitious. The, quote, important material, including diaries and correspondence, is implied, were never intended to be published and have not been published to this day. In Yekaterinburg, an official announcement duplicating the message read before the sick was issued, and another announcement signed by Sverdlov approved the, quote, execution was similarly published. The second announcement read as follows. Decision of the Presidium of All Russian Center, XCOM of 18th July. AC, the All-Russian Center, ex-com of Soviets of WPR, and Cossack deputies in the person of its Presidium approves the action of the Presidium of the Regional Soviet of the Ural. Signed, the President of the Sikh. Y. Sverdlov. Evidently Workmen's and Peasants Republic. That's a little side note. The date given shows that this decision of approval was kept back for 2 days after its ostensible issue. The official evidence demonstrates as the times corresponded that the very text of the Yekaterinburg announcement had been dictated and approved by Sverdlov.